What if an idea wasn't just something in your head, but a living force you could actually see out in the world? Today, we're diving into the pretty radical worldview of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and our guide is Rudolf Steiner's 1897 work, Goethe's Weltanschauung. Steiner really unpacks how Goethe saw the world not as a collection of static things, but as this dynamic, constantly unfolding process. All right, so our story kicks off with a disagreement. Really, it was a friendly argument between two literary giants, but this little spat reveals a massive philosophical canyon between two totally different ways of seeing reality itself. That is not an experience. That is an idea. Imagine hearing that. You've just passionately sketched out a core concept of your life's work for a friend, and that's the response you get. That was the sharp critique the philosopher Friedrich Schiller leveled at his friend Goethe, right after Goethe had shown him his concept of the primordial plant. Now, this wasn't just some casual debate over coffee. No, this was a clash between two millennia of philosophical tradition. This deep-seated separation of mind and matter, and Goethe's radical, new vision of a completely unified reality. Okay, so this slide just lays it out perfectly. For Schiller, and honestly for most of Western philosophy up to that point, you had two separate worlds. There's the messy, imperfect world you experience with your senses, and then there's the perfect, abstract world of ideas, which exists only in your mind. But Goethe, he saw this as a totally false division. For him, the idea wasn't separate from the experience. It was the living, breathing, creative force inside of it. He could, as he famously told Schiller, see the idea with his eyes. So this is the crucial thing to get about Goethe's Urpflanze, his primordial plant. He wasn't talking about some fossil of a plant that existed millions of years ago, no. He was describing the dynamic, invisible blueprint of plantness itself, a living idea that unfolds and expresses itself in every single plant we see. Schiller's skepticism, you have to understand, didn't just come out of nowhere. He was basically standing on the shoulders of philosophical giants who had been systematically driving a wedge between the world of ideas and the world of the senses for 2,000 years. And this timeline, wow, it just shows how deep this tradition goes. It really starts with Plato, who argued that this physical world we see, it's just a bunch of flickering shadows. The real stuff, the perfect forms or ideas, they exist in some higher reality. Centuries later, Descartes comes along and solidifies this split with his famous mind-body dualism. And then you get Immanuel Kant, who basically puts the capstone on the whole thing, arguing we can never know reality as it truly is, the thing in itself. We can only know how our minds filter and organize what our senses pick up. So for centuries, this was the big question in philosophy. Thinkers treated the mind and the world like two separate countries with a heavily guarded border, and they spent all their time trying to figure out how anything could ever pass between them. This profound distrust of the senses, it had a huge consequence. It meant that true reality, according to this long tradition, wasn't here. Not in this world of color and sound and touch. Nope. It was somewhere else entirely, in some pure abstract realm that our physical bodies could just never get to. And then along comes Goethe. He looks at this entire 2,000-year-old problem, this whole mess, and he just refuses to play the game. He offered a completely different, totally unified way of seeing the world. And his big aha moment didn't come in a lab or a library. It came in an art gallery. He was in Italy, surrounded by these masterpieces of Greek and Roman art, and suddenly he saw this incredible connection. He realized that the greatest artists weren't just copying nature, they were tapping into the very same creative laws that nature itself uses. So for Goethe, though, a beautiful sculpture and a beautiful flower, they were expressions of this same underlying creative truth. Art wasn't an imitation of nature. It was nature achieving an even higher level of expression through a human being. This insight led him to a whole new method, objective thinking. And here's the gist of it. You let go of your pre-baked theories. Instead of trying to force your ideas onto an object, you just allow the object's own inner reality to flow into your mind. Your observation becomes a kind of thinking, and your thinking becomes a kind of seeing. And in that process, that wall between you and the world, it just dissolves. So, for Goethe, nature wasn't a static collection of things to be pinned down and cataloged. It was a dynamic, rhythmic process, a kind of dance, driven by two fundamental opposing forces. The first force he called polarity, or polarity. This is the tendency of everything in the material world to separate out into opposites. Think light and dark, positive and negative, expansion and contraction. This is what creates all the tension and dynamism of the physical world.
But working with that first force is the second one, Steigerung. We can translate that as intensification or enhancement. This is the drive for an idea to develop, to refine itself, to sort of climb a ladder of complexity until it reaches its most perfect possible physical expression.
And you can literally watch this whole process play out in a plant. It's just the perfect example. In the seed, the idea is pure potential, right? It's hidden. Then it expands out into the repeating form of the leaves. But then Steigerung kicks in. It intensifies and refines that pattern until it reaches its absolute peak expression, the flower. Finally, it contracts back down into the seed, ready to start the whole cycle over again. You are literally watching an idea unfold right before your eyes. So, okay, this is all incredibly cool, but what does it all mean for us? What are the real implications of seeing the world through Goethe's eyes? Well, here's the real mind-bender. If the laws that shape a galaxy or grow a flower are the exact same laws that shape a thought in our own minds, then we're not separate from nature at all. Our consciousness isn't just some passive mirror reflecting a world that's already finished. It is the very stage where nature's inner creative life finally becomes aware of itself. And as Rudolf Steiner puts it so beautifully, Goethe's vision allows for a spiritual participation in nature's ongoing creation. The act of truly understanding something becomes a creative act itself. This totally transforms knowledge from just a collection of facts into a profound, living connection with the universe. And it leaves us with a pretty fascinating question. If our thinking is just a continuation of nature's process, what then are we capable of creating?